people, there are entities for whom the idea of keeping a nation of renters is a goal.
Yeah, and this has been stated, right? This has been stated by some people, the World Economic Forum, that they wanted people to essentially be renters, and you're not going to have any home ownership, and you're going to be happy about it.
Yeah, in 2016, there was an essay published by the World Economic Forum. The phrase includes, "You'll own nothing and you'll be happy." That was from the article entitled, "Welcome to 2030."
Right. And by the way, this is probably written by a guy who owns a lot, right? You're not going to own anything, be happy. I own a lot, and I'm very happy. There are people that recognize the reality that people that can't own a home are more vulnerable. They're more vulnerable to control, to manipulation. You can impose more controls on them because they don't have the independence of owning a home. The biggest investment most people are ever going to have is owning their own home. And if you take that away, you make people now more vulnerable to manipulation and control by powerful forces.
And the people in power understand that. That's why Eric Eggers is with us today. He's Vice President of Research at the Government Accountability Institute and co-host of the Drill Down podcast with Peter Schweizer. He literally wrote the book on how the left manipulates the rules of our elections. I'm from Illinois, so I definitely understand that. The title is Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election. He has spent years following the money and the networks behind political corruption, foreign influence, and the activist infrastructure that changes policy without voters ever really being told what is going on. This is just Eric, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Hey, it's great to be here. Good morning, Detroit. Good morning, John.
Yeah, good morning. Eric, start by explaining the core argument Peter lays out in They Want a Nation of Renters. What are the main levers he and you identify that are making it harder for Americans to own a home?
Well, first off, stuff's just more expensive, right? I mean, what caught our eye is Donald Trump's unveiling the concept, or at least floating it, of a 50-year mortgage. And as we discussed in the podcast, I was like, wait a minute. All due respect to President Trump, a 50-year mortgage is a terrible idea. It's going to lower the monthly payment by like $250, and it's going to make the bank hundreds of thousands of more dollars. It's going to cost you a ton more money. So we're like, well, so what's the actual issue they're attempting to address? And as we dug into it, we realized just how expensive home ownership has become and how many fewer people are participating in the concept. Less than 40% of people under the age of 35 own a home. The median home cost, I think, is now $400,000. The ratio of income to purchasing a home is now 5-to-1 as opposed to 3-to-1. So it's a lot more expensive. And then we started to kind of unpack, well, why is that? And what are the forces that they're driving? And John, we kind of came up with two main forces. One is immigration. I mean, the reality is we've just let a ton more people in this country, and we haven't built many more homes. And then the second is environmental regulations, which obviously makes it more expensive for homes to be built and to kind of qualify or abide by the new rules. So those are the main things that we kind of get into. And then we get into, and I give Peter a lot of credit. You play the clip. His point is like there are forces that do want you to own nothing. The World Economic Forum had an essay, "You will own nothing and be happy." And as we point out in the podcast, the Venn diagram of people who encourage owning little or nothing and who encourage open borders is significant. There's a lot of overlap there. So it's just kind of fun to zoom out and take a look at what's really happening here.
Yep. And I think Stephen Miller pretty much backs up what you're saying. Here he is. I want you to hear what he has to say and get your take on it.
40% of the population of rent-controlled housing in New York City are foreign-born. Think about that. In one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world, 40% of rent-controlled properties are being lived in by people who weren't even born in the country. What kind of system is this? We bring in people from foreign countries, and then we pay to lower the cost of their housing, while people who were born here have to pay higher prices. So when President Trump is reducing net migration, that is what's going to ultimately, along with all these other steps, deregulation, historic tax cuts, going to bring down the cost of housing.
Yeah. That, and also, Eric, we should probably tackle the zoning rules as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, John, I'm just saying, you just kind of made me have this little existential crisis. Like, I'm not saying I got to get out more, but I literally watched Stephen Miller say that on the news last night. And now you're playing it for me this morning. I'm like, bro.
Sorry about that.
But he's absolutely right. And just quickly to your point about the environmental regulations, environmental regulations in San Francisco add, on average, $400,000 the cost of a home, otherwise known as the median price of a home. So absolutely, environmental regulations are a significant driving factor as well. And, I do think, Stephen Miller is a really smart guy, and the Trump administration is doing a lot right. But one takeaway, I'm not sure what you guys kind of thought about the election results from a few weeks ago, but the one takeaway for me from the election results, in the governor's race in Virginia and New Jersey is you saw Latino and Hispanic support for President Trump drop fairly significantly. He had 40% of it in 2024. It's down to less than a third now. Yeah. And polls show that more than 2/3 of Hispanic and Latinos think the immigration and ICE raids are going too far. And what I think part is behind that is I think the Trump administration needs to do a better job of connecting the dots. As you just heard Stephen Miller attempt to do, they can say, listen, we're enforcing the law not because we don't like people who don't look like you, but we're enforcing the law because we think this is one of the ways that we're going to make things more affordable for you. We think that when the borders were as open as they were under the Biden administration, there's a correlation there. Yeah, and if they can say, look, we think by getting rid of some of these people that shouldn't be here, we think it's going to drive the cost of housing down. I think that they might find they win back some of that support.
Yeah, I think also there was a war within the Trump administration of those who want to go after everybody and those who wanted to have targeted immigration raids and go after the worst of the worst. I do know I've had people on who spoke to the internal fight that was going on within the Trump administration about that. And I think the Trump side won. Trump really does want to go after the worst of the worst. I don't think he so much want to go after those who've been here 20, 30 years. What say you? Is that part of the why that Latino, you think that Latino support has dropped?
So actually, in addition to doing a podcast with Peter Schweizer, I do a podcast with investigative reporter Susan Crabtree. She writes for Real Clear Politics, and it's called On Background. So that's another podcast that people are into it. They could check out. And we actually had a reporter on who covers ICE and Border Patrol named Anna Giardelli. Yes. And she told us how there's this, to your point, there is an absolute tension between Border Patrol and ICE. And, who should do what and who's in charge of what and how aggressively should they go after everybody and who should they go after? Yeah. So I think that's maybe the most important or one of the most important kind of stories that's happening in this country. And it doesn't sound like everybody, to your point, is on the same page.
That's true.
And they got to kind of figure it out. Or if nothing else, they got to figure out how they're going to talk about it.
Correct.
But that's why, they're sending out people like Charlotte and New Orleans, and they're saying, hey, like, I think Charlotte is now, the new battleground. They're saying there's a ton of illegal immigrants here. Now, the question is, are those people who have been here 20, 30 years, are those people who are committing crimes or who are on parole, or those like the catch and release people from the Biden era? So, again, it comes down to messaging, and that's one of the reasons why I think you see Stephen Miller on TV as much as he is.
Now, Peter alluded to the World Economic Forum famously pushing the line, you will own nothing and be happy by 2030. When you compare that vision with what you and Peter are documenting, does it look like a coincidence, or do you see actual coordination among elites, global institutions, and a lot of these domestic political actors?
Well, so a guy I work with, Seamus Bruner, wrote a book called Control Oligarchs. And he absolutely lays out the argument for the latter, that there are it's a weird thing to say, but the people like the Rockefellers and Bill Gateses and the Klaus Schwabs, the World Economic Forums of the world, absolutely are not quiet about this agenda. They want to make you eat stuff that's not real meat and eat bugs and, rent, not own. And the stuff that they have laid out as a vision for a more sustainable future, quote unquote, is sort of dystopian and scary. Meanwhile, you got Elon Musk being like, look, we can put 8 billion people in New York. We're fine.
Yeah.
So I do think, again, it's about like which perspective do you adhere to. But I guess the answer to your question is we absolutely do see forces who had much more power, thankfully, in the previous administration than the current one, who do want to drive people towards a certain vision. And that's one of the things that I think Donald Trump is fighting so aggressively against.
Now with New York, on top of all these issues, they elected a out of the closet Democrat socialist. How do you think that the Mamdani what will the Mamdani effect be in New York? We know what he wants to do. He built his campaign on aggressive rent freezes, expanded. He wants to expand rent stabilization and he wants these heavy public subsidies for housing. I mean, what will that do to the market in New York?
It's a good question. I don't think it's going to do a whole lot because I don't think he's going to do a whole lot. I think that there's the whole mess around and find out part. I don't think New York's going to find out, or they're going to find out that a lot of what he sold is sort of like magic beans, because even the Democrat governor's like, look, I'm not going to raise taxes. We're not going to be doing this stuff. We're not taking revenue out of the bus system. We can't afford it. So I think he's fairly limited in terms of what he can actually do from a policy position standpoint. And at the end of the day, I think Mamdani is his appeal. I don't know what you think, but to me, his appeal is less about clamoring for democratic socialism, although he did get a significant amount of support from immigrants who, it should be pointed out, came to this country from places that don't exactly practice capitalism. So there is some inherent benefit there. But I think what he was really selling is things are so expensive in New York.
Yep.
And he was campaigning on trying to solve a specific problem. Like people don't want socialism. They just want it to be cheaper to live. And it's a reflection of the failed democratic leadership of that city for decades. And so Mamdani to me is just an indictment of what's happened before, not so much a desire for what he pledged to bring.
Eric, I so agree with you, because one of the things I tried to send to Cuomo and Sliwa was that there was a hole in his whole presentation. Almost everything that I'm a former state legislator. Almost everything that he wanted to do that was substantive he had to get the power to do so from Albany. And Cuomo, being a former governor, he should have known that. And I just don't think they attacked him from that angle to say your whole campaign of what you're trying to run on can't be done unless Kathy Hochul says yes. And that's why I believe one of the next most important elections is getting Elise Stefanik to become the next governor of the state of New York. Because if that happens, she becomes the backstop to a lot of his socialist agenda, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And I think even if she doesn't become elected governor, I still think that mainstream Democrats are the backstop, because I think they've said, they understand that there are midterms coming up next year. The Republicans, I think, quietly are very happy with Mamdani's election. They're very happy to let Mamdani become the face of the Democrat Party for 2026. The Democrats know that, which is one of the reasons why you didn't even see Hakeem Jeffries endorse him for a long time. And it's not like they've embraced this guy. So they're trying to create some separation. I think that will begin in the state legislature in New York, as you correctly point out. I also think, just to the point about Cuomo, my understanding is you're also a former law enforcement officer.
Yes.
So you understand, too, while it should have been disqualifying that Mamdani's tweeting about defund the police and saying all these negative things about police officers in 2020, unfortunately, elections are about choices. And so Mamdani is able to be not so bad, because while he was tweeting about the police in 2020, Cuomo was killing everybody's grandma by sending them to nursing homes. So during COVID, so it's not like it was a great choice for New Yorkers. And I think that's another dynamic there.
And I think a lot of people don't know this thing that's been. There's some people in the Trump administration. Pam Bondi basically put the squash to it. Mamdani has some immigration issues. There were people in the Trump administration that wanted to go after him for those immigration issues with his own immigration. I say this, Eric, the Republican Party, they just don't have the gumption. If this was a Democrat, knowing that a Republican that they didn't want in a position, they would have laid down the hammer and gone after him and exposed that. Why is it that Republicans, you look at it with Jeffrey Epstein, you look at it with nuking the Senate, why are they so afraid to make these big monumental decisions that would affect and change the very outcome, Eric?
John, let me just push back a little bit. I don't think that's true. I don't think we have any evidence to suggest that Democrats would leverage the full weight and power of law enforcement and federal agencies to go after political opponents. Oh, wait, yeah, we do. They charge Donald Trump with force. Sorry, I forgot. I forgot he was facing hundreds of years of prison time and many. Yeah, it's a good point. But I think, this has always been how the Democrats win on this issue, right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember 2016. And I think they just were very sensitive about, when Hillary was running against Donald Trump and the crowd chants of lock her up. And he even said you'd be in prison during the debate. And then they're like, oh, my gosh, the wailing, the gnashing of teeth. They lost their mind. And obviously the Trump administration did not pursue criminal charges against Hillary Clinton. And then for that, he was rewarded by the opposite happening. And, the Democrats always say the opposite of what's actually happening. They said Donald Trump was a threat to democracy, and then they run somebody for president who did receive 0 votes in a Democrat primary process. They say that they're the, using law enforcement, and then obviously they're the ones that charging Donald Trump and other Republicans. Steve Bannon went to prison, right? A bunch of people went to prison. So, no, it's weird. But I also think that they actually do try to stand up for and adhere to some, some principles, because at the end of the day, like, we are a country of laws, and that's got to matter.
Yeah, but Eric, when it comes to nuking the Senate, people forget, and I've been screaming it on because I do radio 6 days a week. I do Monday through Friday Detroit, and then I do a Chicago Detroit show called Black and Right, where I tackle a lot of the cultural issues. And I had to remind people, and a lot of callers was like, "Yeah, I forgot about that." During the Biden administration, if it wasn't for Sinema, Fetterman, and Manchin, they would have nuked the Senate. We would have right now 15 Supreme Court justices right now. Had those 3 not stood up and said no. And that's what I mean. Republicans are listen, we are in a war for for the soul of this nation. I don't mean fighting, but for the soul of this nation. And I want America and Americans to win. Is that so far out there of a belief system to have?
I think you're absolutely right to want America and Americans to win. And what you're actually speaking to is you want what America stands for to win.
Yes.
And what America has stood for. And I think that there are very much a competing vision. Back to your whole, like, the World Economic Forum vision for what the future should look like, or that we don't really have borders and we're all sort of this one utopian society, as opposed to the one shining city on a hill, as Ronald Reagan put out. But I would just say this. The nuking the Senate, the getting rid of the filibuster, we're glad that the Democrats didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
Because because the Democrats didn't do it, that's why we don't have 15 Supreme Court justices. And so I think it's kind of one of those where if you want the Republicans to do it, it's like, which weapon do you want the other side to eventually be able to use?
Yeah.
And you don't want them to be able to use it. If you don't want them to use it, maybe we shouldn't get it out the holster,
Yeah, but you and I know that if they get back in power, they're definitely going to pull the trigger on nuking the Senate. I want to talk real quick about Michigan. There was an article in Axios back in July. Sammy Sparber and Joe Gillian. They talked about even as the national institution investors have cooled, the share of homes purchased by institutional buyers in Metro Detroit has nudged up from about 7.3%. Let me look at my notes, to 7.4% over the past year. Why would capital keep flowing into Michigan in particular?
It's a good question. I mean, you're on the ground there.
Yeah.
I think, like, I like Detroit. I got family from the Britain area and up in Grayling. So I like Michigan. I enjoy visiting there. I think some people still believe in, being a seat of American innovation and industry. And I think that they've had some positive signs about the way the city might be ticking up. But I think they've also tried to be smart about offering a lot of financial incentives, if I'm not mistaken, for investing in the area, correct?
Yeah. Now, Eric, you spent your career exposing not just fraud, rigged systems, and specifically the way elites game the rules. When you look at this housing market, do you believe this is that next great battleground for election integrity and political freedom? If we lose the fight for ownership, what else do we lose?
Well, it's funny, John. I hadn't thought about this, but in my book, Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election, which ironically enough came out in 2018, so it came out before the 2020 election, we document a lot about the ways in which the systems that are most vulnerable for manipulation. And actually, do you know what one of the areas that are the most rife for fraud and abuse are public housing units? So, and you got places where people don't own individual homes, but whether they're so public housing units, Section 8 housing, even nursing homes, where you've got a bunch of people in small areas together, they're absolutely the easiest to manipulate. California became the first state to officially legalize ballot harvesting, which became very popular in 2020. But the practice of soliciting, helping, collecting, and then delivering ballots has been widespread and popular in those areas for decades. It happens especially in big cities. So, it wouldn't shock me if that's part of the calculus as well. So listen, when we have people who are not of terrific means, they don't seem as invested because they don't own a thing. And so they're sort of like a bunch of people who don't have a massive investment in the future of what we're doing, and they're all here, then it is easier to kind of manipulate them either through, kind of rhetoric or through kind of more felonious means.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Eric Eggers, this was fun today. I'm definitely going to tell Riley to make sure that you are on the rotation, because I really thoroughly enjoyed interviewing you today. Thank you so much. He's Vice President of Research at the Government Accountability Institute and co-host of the Drill Down podcast with Peter Schweizer and with Susan Captree. What's the name of that one again? Where can people find it and find you?
Hey, look, I like doing podcasts the way Cade Cunningham likes hoisting up jumpers, So you can find me on social media at just at Eric_Eggers, and you can check out the podcast with you at thedrilldown.com.
Eric Eggers, thanks so much for joining us, man. It's truly been my pleasure.
I appreciate it, John. Thank you.
All right. I like that guy. Oh, my goodness. Paul, I love people that are able to educate the audience, and I think that's one of those things we had today with Eric Eggers, Vice President of Research at the Government Accountability Institute. Michael Pack coming up next, talking about the narco strikes. We'll be right back.